Hello everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial on how to apply the law on battery to a criminal law scenario. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the Nigel Farage milkshake mini scenario. We're going to be pulling out the key issues in it by recapping the law on battery. And then we're going to be looking at how we use the idea structure to get a really nice written answer to this scenario. So let's start, as always, by looking at what the situation is we've been given. This one happens to make me smile because it's no secret that I am not a fan of Nigel Farage, and this is a true story. He was, as you can see, pelted with a milkshake by, and this is actually the real defendant's name, Paul Crowther, who threw a banana milkshake on him. So the situation is a true story. And in case you're interested, Paul Crowther did appear at North Shields Magistrates Court and he pleaded guilty to common assault, which we know is a phrase that the police use for assault or a battery. And he also admitted to criminal damage to a £239 lapel microphone on Farage's suit. The district judge in the case ordered him to carry out 150 hours of unpaid work for the act of, as the judge described, crass stupidity, and he was told to pay £520, including £350 in compensation to Farage for damaging the microphone, inconvenience and suit cleaning. But I thought it was quite funny that within hours of the sentencing, an online fundraiser raised more than £650 to help Crowther pay the legal bill. So anyway, I digress. Let's get back to this. So we're going to look at how we apply our knowledge of the law on battery to this scenario. So we know that it's battery that we need to be applying because it's here on the title and we know what happened to Paul, but you're being asked in this scenario to discuss Paul's criminal liability. So in the exam, you would have had to work out from this situation, it's a battery I need to be discussing. And hopefully you would have spotted that no problem because it's the application of unlawful force here. And although Paul didn't punch him in the face, that's what we typically think of with a battery, isn't it? Direct contact. He's thrown a drink on him. And so he has applied force unlawfully to Nigel. And it doesn't matter, of course, that the force is slight. And I think this is a good point for us just to very quickly recap what the law on battery is. So on this slide, I've summarised the law on battery. This is a really quick recap. It might be a good idea for you to go back to the video tutorial that is just on the law on assault and battery and watch that so that the law is really fresh in your mind before you come to try and apply it. But quick recap then, we've got the actus reus of battery at the top, the application of unlawful force, and the mens rea of battery at the bottom, intentional recklessness as to whether force is applied, and we've got some key cases. So just to recap then, the application of unlawful force can be the slightest touch, Collins and Wilcock, and it can even just be touching the victim's clothes when they're wearing them, and that comes from Thomas. But we have to be aware that there is implied consent to the ordinary jostlings of everyday life. Battery can be through an indirect act, as in DPP and K, and as well as battery being committed with intention, Venner tells us that you can be guilty of a battery if you're reckless as to whether the force is applied. So looking at this in terms of our Nigel Farage scenario, Collins and Wilcock quite relevant to us because, of course, having the milkshake thrown on him wouldn't hurt. It's a slight touch, but that's still going to be sufficient. We could be using Thomas as well, of course, to say that it doesn't matter that the milkshake is just on his clothes rather than on his face. That's going to be sufficient as well. So now that's fresh in our mind, let's have a look at how we use idea specifically on battery. As always, we're using the idea structure. We identify, define, explain, and apply. So firstly, you identify who your defendant is and when they've committed a battery. So in our case, Paul might have committed a battery when he threw a milkshake over Nigel Farage. And make sure you point out when they did what. Because although we've got a very tiny scenario, in the exam you're going to have a much bigger one with lots of things going on. So it's important that you identify for the examiner, when did the battery happen? If you say you might be liable for a battery, but 15 things have happened in the scenario, the examiner isn't going to know which bit you're talking about. So identify that it might be a battery. Then you define the AR of battery and the MR of battery. So remember, with your D, you just list them. Okay. In your E, you are then going to explain that actus reus and that mens rea with your cases. And once you've done that, you'll be able to apply the law. Always start with your actus reus and say whether the actus reus has been met and how you know this. Again, you can't just say he meets the actus reus of battery, because you could have guessed that. You need to explain why. You need to say because X, Y, and Z. And then once you've done the actus reus, say whether the mens rea of battery has been met and how you know this. So for your mens rea, you're going to have to be talking about, did he intend it or was he reckless? And what is it in the scenario that tells you it was intentional recklessness? And that will get you good application marks because it's showing that you understand the law. And then a nice little conclusion at the end. So on my next slide, I've done a bullet point mark scheme for the Nigel Farage scenario, Here's my answer. You can ignore the ones. They're just for a rough mark scheme if we were doing this timed in class. I've put idea down the side so you can see how I've structured my answer. And I've also colour-coded it. Anything to do with the actus reus I've done green, and anything to do with the mens rea I've done blue. And I think that shows that a nice answer in law is going between the two colours, green, blue, and it's showing that you are explaining and applying both parts of the law, which is important. If we look at my answer then, again, it's bullet pointy. In the exam, you need to write in full sentences and explain your cases and explain everything fully. This is just quite listy, so you can at least see what content we need. So we identify Paul might be liable for a battery on Nigel when he throws milkshake on him. And notice I say he might be liable, even though I already know in my head he is liable, because we're kind of showing our working as we go. We then define the actus reus of battery, so the application of unlawful force, and we define the mens rea, intention or recklessness as to whether unlawful force is applied. And then I explain what I've just said here using my cases. So force can be the slightest touch, Collins, even clothes, Thomas, could be through an omission, Santana Bermudez, can be through an indirect act like the acid in the hand dryer in DPP and K. And it would be useful in your answer to just outline briefly the situation to help explain the law. And then I've explained the mens rea, intentional recklessness as to whether force is applied, recklessness is enough, vena, and you could even mention there, so in vena, it didn't matter that he didn't intend to break the police officer's hand, he was reckless when he was kicking, when he was being arrested. I've then gone into my application, and I always apply the actus reus before the mens rea, and you can see that clearly with the colour coding. So I've said that Paul meets the actus reus of battery when he throws the milkshake on him, and the milkshake is the force, albeit slight, Collins and Wilcock. I've then said that Paul meets the mens rea of battery because he clearly intended to throw the milkshake on Nigel. It was his aim, objective and purpose, Mohan. Now that's a mens rea case from the topic of mens rea, obviously, but it's great to pull it in here to help you make the point that clearly this was a deliberate act. Paul set out to throw that milkshake on Nigel. It was his aim, objective and purpose. And then I'm concluding, Paul is guilty of battery, which has a maximum sentence of 6 months imprisonment. Okay, so I hope that was helpful in helping you to see how you get a nice answer to the law on battery. I recommend that you go and practice this on some other mini scenarios from your booklet using that idea framework that we've looked at in this tutorial. And do watch the other tutorials on how to apply the law on ABH, assault, etc. They're all dealt with in separate videos.